Today I'm going to teach you how to sew an arrow quilt block. I know there are other arrow tutorials out there because I went looking for one to make this quilt. However, they all seemed complicated or wasted large amounts of fabric or required time-consuming techniques like paper piecing. So I started over and came up with this simpler method. These are the basic supplies you'll need to make an arrow block. I've labeled them according to the colors I've used, but of course you can change these. This screen shows the cuts you'll need to make per arrow block. It seems like a lot to cut, but if you're making several blocks, it goes quickly. The block measures 26.5 inches long and 8.25 inches tall. You'll need 5 different prints to create the feathers and arrowhead. I chose to keep mine in the same color family for each arrow. Fat quarters work well for this since the strips need to be 20 inches long. Layer 3 of the pattern fabrics together and cut to 1 by 20 inches. I recommend using a rotary cutter and ruler on top of a cutting mat.
Don't feel afraid to innovate. Don't miss a chance to be creative. Don't. Why don't I try this at home? Try this at home.
Layer the other 2 pattern fabrics together and cut to 1.5 by 20 inches. Arrange the strips in a pleasing order. Layer 2 strips right sides together and sew down the long side with a 1/4 inch seam. You can pin these if you find it helpful, but I think it's fastest to align the edges as I sew. Sew the next strip right sides together to the previous strip. You can press the previous strip open, or you can just hold it out of the way as you sew and we can press it later. Repeat this process for the remaining 2 strips. You should now have a rectangle that's about 4 by 20 inches. Press the seams in the same direction from the back of the fabric. Then flip it over and press from the front, gently tugging at the fabric to spread the seam. Place the sewn strip right side down on the cutting mat, then fold it in half widthwise so it's about 10 inches long. Smooth with your hands or press if necessary. Print and cut out the free arrow feather pattern from madebymarzipan.com. Lay it on the fabric so that the upper right point is along the center fold. The top and bottom edges should align with the edges of your fabric strip. You'll have a little excess fabric at the end, so you don't have to worry about whether the ends of your fabric strip are perfect. Align the edge of your ruler with the diagonal side of the template and cut. Repeat for the other diagonal side of the template. When you take it apart, you'll have 2 feather pieces, as well as a large arrowhead. You'll also have 2 small scrap triangles, which you can save for another project or work into your quilt design. Now we'll create the arrow shaft. Cut a 1.5 by 20 inch gray strip for the shaft. Cut a small 1.5 by 4 inch white rectangle to finish the end of the shaft. Layer the gray strip and white rectangle right sides together and sew the short end with a 1/4 inch seam. Press. Now I'm going to show you a trick to make this go faster if you're making multiple arrows. This is an alternate method to the single arrow shaft I just demonstrated. To make 4 arrow shafts at once, cut a gray rectangle that is 6 by 20 inches and a white rectangle that is 6 by 4 inches. Sew right sides together at a short end and press. Cut into strips that are 1.5 inches wide to create 4 arrow shafts. Okay, now we're back to assembling our arrow shaft. Cut 4 white squares that are 4 by 4 inches. These will make up the background area by the feathers, like so. Press the squares in half on the diagonal. Open a square wrong side up and place it so that the pressed center seam overlaps the edge of the pattern feather by 1/4 inch. This will cause the point of the pattern feather piece to extend past the edge of the white square at top. That's okay. Pin together, then sew on top of the pressed center mark. Fold the white square in half along the seam to create a half square triangle and press. If you have a light colored background fabric like I do, you might want to snip off the excess point on the feather piece. Repeat the previous steps to finish the opposite side of the feather piece, and then do the same for the remaining feather piece. Now we need to add the background rectangles for the shaft. Cut 2 white rectangles that are 4 by 15 1/4 inches. Layer these right sides together on the feather pieces, sewing with a 1/4 inch seam. Press each strip. Next we are going to sew the top feather strip to the gray shaft. Place right sides together and sew the long edge. Repeat for the bottom feather strip. Press. Finally, we can assemble the arrowhead. Cut 2 4.5 by 4.5 inch white squares. Fold on the diagonal and press as you did with the previous squares. Layer wrong side up on the arrowhead so that the square center line is a 1/4 inch from the edge of the arrowhead. Pin and sew down the center line. Press. Repeat on the other side. The white background fabrics will overlap at the point. Lastly, place the arrowhead piece right sides together on the shaft piece and sew the edge with a 1/4 inch seam. Press to finish. Now you have a completed arrow block. I chose to make a quilt with 5 of these arrows, adding a white strip on each end of every rectangle to make the width 50 inches. I cut white strips that were 3.5 inches wide and 50 inches long, and added one of these strips between each arrow. If you'd like to learn how to bind a quilt with mitered corners, please check out my tutorial on madebymarzipan.com. If you want to learn how to free motion quilt on your regular sewing machine, I have a video for that too.
Try this at home.